Leagues 4, Trailblazer Reloaded. One of Jagex's most successful updates is now drawing to a close. In the League, there were a lot of fun new relics, as well as some familiar faces that made a return. Some of the relics even caused some heated rivalry between players. If you played, I'm sure you know exactly which ones I'm talking about. And I thought it would be a good bit of fun to talk about all the relics that were given this year, and how I thought they worked out. So without further ado, let's get into it. In Tier 1, we saw the return of the original Trailblazer starter relics, with Endless Harvest, which saw no real changes, Production Prodigy, which combined Production Master and its relevant skills, gaining the benefits of Skilling Prodigy, and lastly, we had the Trickster. I like this tier a lot because there was no real one-size-fits-all choice. Each relic gave benefits to each different type of playstyle. Endless Harvest was best suited for those with not much time to play and wanted to benefit from a more idle experience. This relic allowed you to harvest double resources when fishing, woodcutting, or mining. You gain the experience from the extra resource, and all resources you gather are sent directly to your bank. Not having to make any actions at places like Karambwans or even Pure Essence Mine allowed you to have some form of a linear progression that you could do without ever really having to interact with your client for about 25 minutes straight. Granted, you used the RuneLight plugin that helped you with that. So without ever having to pick a new region, idle players could maximize this relic's effectiveness. It also had some strong applications for those looking to maximize overall experience gains, and quite a few people did take advantage of this alongside other relics that we'll talk about later. But as good as Endless Harvest was, it wasn't as flashy as its competition, first of which being Production Prodigy. Production Prodigy allowed you to do things like cut an inventory of gems all at once, fletch an inventory of logs, you get the idea. But this year it got an added bonus of boosting those skills at Aeduan by 12. Naturally, this effect falls off late game, but the first effect gets stronger in late game, so this felt like a pretty strong fit to its already weak early game. Now, much like Endless Harvest, this relic has some cute synergies with a relic in a later tier, which again, I will mention when we get there. But we have one last relic to talk about, and that's the Trickster. This one was the most popular out of the three, and it's not hard to see why. It affects 4 skills that most players generally don't like, being Thieving, Agility, Fire-making, and Hunter. While the bonuses it gave to Hunter were just a carbon copy of Endless Harvest and would have made more sense in that relic, it's the other 3 that really sold this one. Never failing pickpocketing, automatically re-pickpocketing, and tripling your coin pouch limit made for some idle gameplay in itself, as well as opening up some new pickpocket targets to be viable, as well as the most optimal training methods for thieving. The Silverhawk boots, which kind of spoke for themselves for agility training, and the fire-making effect, which allowed you to light 9 logs simultaneously, which was incredibly goofy, but still accelerated this already boring skill without having to go find out when Joel is getting on Skype. I think most of us can agree that Trickster was the strongest standalone relic in this tier, but overall, this tier was really well balanced. I'm not going to be making a full-on tier list, since I didn't really get to fully experience every relic, so instead I'll just be giving them either a thumbs up, thumbs down, or thumbs sideways. All 3 of these get the thumbs up from me. The balance was really good on this one, aside from Trickster's Hunter perk, which I believe should have been moved to Endless Harvest. I think if that change was made, we might have had a more evenly distributed selection. Tier 2 brought in the following 3 relics: Fairy's Flight, Globetrotter, and Secure Connection. Secure Connection was a new one, which kept your private information safe, allowed you to watch other shows and movies not displayed in your country, and gave you 4 months of NordVPN free. NordVPN gives you ultimate protection by switching your true IP address with one of their own so you can stay safe and anonymous while doing anything on the web. NordVPN also keeps your private information secure by ensuring all of your data being transferred between your devices and the internet is encrypted, so your internet service provider can't log all the sites you visit. NordVPN can also allow you to watch shows and movies that aren't available in your country. One of NordVPN's new features is MeshNet, which allows you to create a secure local area network between yours and other devices, perfect for games with just your friends or even sharing files and data for work purposes. So find out how you can get 4 months for free by visiting nordvpn.com/acoldone or click the link in the description. Big thank you to NordVPN for sponsoring today's video. Moving on to the next relics, we have Fairy's Flight. This was almost a carbon copy of the one in the original Trailblazer, allowing you to remotely teleport to any fairy ring or spirit tree you had access to. But this year, it saw a massive buff, giving you the ability to teleport to any tool leprechaun that you had access to. Now on the surface, it just sounds like a more convenient way to do farm runs, but when you play around with it for a few hours, you realize some of the teleport spots are really good. There's a teleport spot right next to a bank and the Slayer Master Steve. Now granted, this is locked in the Gnome Stronghold, which you need Kandarin to access, but this is just one of many examples that I could give. And it was one of the best tools for grinding out clue scrolls. If you take a few minutes and look around the world map and see where every single farming spot is compared to where every normal teleport is, you'll see why this thing was incredibly strong. Then there's its competition, Globetrotter. In short, this one allowed you to teleport to anywhere that your player-owned house upgrades can take you. Now on the surface this one seems just a bit weak, considering it doesn't really unlock any new teleports, but remember, some teleports require certain spellbooks to use, and you don't get all of them immediately, and you're not going to get all of them unless you pick specifically Desert, Fremennik, and Zeah. The best example I can give is one that I ran into on my own journey. If you picked Mauritania, then you might be interested in doing some Barrows. And guess what teleport is locked behind Zeah? Barrows teleport! And if you don't have that, your closest sustainable option is the Mauritania Legs 3, and oh boy is that a trek, having to do that hundreds of times was not fun. Other notable uses are the Dragonstone Jewelry teleports without Asgarnia or Fremennik, which, reminder, you can't recharge them without Hero's Quest, and both of those regions allowed you to do so. Now for the rest of these relics, I'm going to be rating them on the assumption that you picked regions that complemented them well. Fairy's Flight gets a thumbs up, while Globetrotter gets the thumbs sideways. The balance for this one was really good, but I feel like Fairy's Flight was just a bit stronger than what Globetrotter offered, personally. Up next is the most heated debate of 2023 in old school RuneScape. Fire Sale versus Banker's Note. I honestly want to call this the best tier in the entire game mode just based on the memes it produced alone, but let's look what they did objectively. Fire Sale gave you infinite money, allowing you to get anything from stores that use GPS currency for free. Also, anything you buy is noted that you can spam buy. But the downside, if you can really call it that, is stores that did this would no longer buy items from you. Which again is not really a downside since you don't need money anymore. And if you do, there's the high level alchemy spell. This had some really goofy applications, like allowing you to get all the obsidian tasks done instantly in the early game, getting all the supplies for Tuna Mill construction for free if you wanted to do so from Fremennik, and even the Crystal Crown task if you misclicked and picked Tyrannwyn. The power spike this relic gave you in the early game was honestly unmatched. Unfortunately, it fell off incredibly hard after a few days of gameplay, but with all that momentum for most people, it really didn't matter. This one also complemented Production Prodigy very well, since some shops sold some reasonable skilling items like uncut gems and raw Karambwans. Then we've got its competition, the Banker's Note. While this one wasn't nearly as strong in the early game when you unlock this tier, it scaled into an absolute monster once you got to the mid and late game. There's simply not enough time in the video to talk about everywhere this relic shines, but a few notable examples include spamming Pure Essence at a runecrafting altar of your choice, spamming bananas in the magic training arena, and smuggling out supplies from the Theater of Blood. Something worth mentioning was this tier gave everyone last recall, but we're here to talk about the relics you chose, not the freebies. Both relics get the thumbs up from me. One amplified early game, while the other amplified late game. The aim for these is to complement all types of playstyles, and this one did really well at doing that. Banker's Note in my opinion was objectively better, but something that would have leveled the playing field a bit and maybe made this a hard choice for some people was allowing those that picked Fire Sale to have the ability to buy X amount of items from a store, instead of having to constantly spam buy 50 on everything, just to save themselves from getting some arthritis. Other than that, it was a very well balanced tier. Next up, we have the tier that defined your gameplay, the Combat Style tier. Archer's Embrace, Brawler's Resolve, and Superior Sorcerer. Each having the same blanket effect of doubling your attack speed, and when rounding odd numbers, it would favor the player if it was a 5-tick weapon or slower. So for example, if you picked the Range Relic, it would make both the Twisted Bow and the Magic Shortbow have the same exact attack speed of a Blowpipe in the main game. But these all had added benefits other than just attack speed. Archer's Embrace would double your accuracy, have a 10% chance to double hit, save 90% of your ammo, which finally included Chinchampas, and give your enchanted bolts double the chance to activate. Brawler's Resolve would increase your defense bonuses by 50%, give your hits 10% chance to double your damage, save 90% of your charges on any melee weapon that had charges, and grant you immunity to all status effects such as Venom or Dragonfire. Superior Sorcerer would give you 175% increased accuracy and 20% increased damage, save 90% of your runes and magic weapon charges, give you a free rune pouch which could hold an extra 2 types of runes, as well as a book that allowed you to change your spellbook whenever you wanted, granted you had the spellbook unlocked to begin with. Freezing and other holding spells would have 100% accuracy on non-frozen targets, and the last effect which caused your single target spells to deal splash damage to 5 adjacent targets in multi-combat. Now that's a lot to digest, but there's not much to talk about honestly. To keep things short, each relic gave its respective style benefits that the style really wanted. All of them were pretty equal on the surface, and unlike the first Trailblazer, each style's ace weapon was available this time. And each style got some interesting synergies with later relics, but we'll talk about that again when we get there. All of these get a thumbs up for me. Actually, I'm going to give the mage a diagonal thumbs up, because that splash effect was the biggest nuisance sometimes, and we had no way to turn it off. Tier 5 is where things start to get interesting. We have Treasure Seeker, Bloodthirsty, and Infernal Gathering. All three of these affecting different aspects of gameplay. Treasure Seeker made clue drops much more common. All clues would only require their minimum amount of steps to complete. You'd be given the maximum amount of reward rolls, and completing a clue would give you a small chance to generate an extra casket, and even a chance to generate a casket of a higher tier. This is the one I took, and from my personal experience, it got very goofy once you started a clue scroll session, especially beginners. It was pretty crazy seeing how fast you could accumulate caskets. If you were going for points, especially the front page, this relic was an absolute no-brainer choice. Next, we have Bloodthirsty. Slayer bracelets had a 35% chance to proc, up from 25%, and never lost charges. You had remote access to contacting a Slayer Master by just using a Slayer Gem or any Slayer Gem related item. Superiors went from a 1 in 50 chance to spawn to a 1 in 25 chance. You got bonus Slayer points anytime you killed a Superior. You had doubled loot rolls from killing Superiors. And killing one would give you a 25% chance of getting a Bloodthirsty Superior. These gave you 9 loot rolls, triple the chance of a Superior unique, gave a guaranteed clue, and a roll in the Bloodthirsty unique drop table, which was mostly just Herblore supplies. Now the Herblore supplies part seems mundane, but if your regions are missing an easy way to acquire something, this was kinda nice. Not to mention getting you to that imbued heart faster, making just one topaz bracelet, and getting extra Slayer points, more consistently allowing you to skip for the task that you want. If you wanted to just rush PVM, this was absolutely the pick for you. Last, we talk about Infernal Gathering. This was the oddball pick, but honestly it was not meant to be slept on. You're given 3 infernal tools, one for woodcutting, mining, and fishing, all having the same strengths as their main game crystal counterparts, but had no requirements to equip or use. All tools would operate 1 cycle faster, except for the harpoon, which was 2 faster. Obtaining any resource would perform its complementary action, so catching a fish would cook it, mining an ore would smelt it, and chopping a log would burn it. Remember how I mentioned earlier that Endless Harvest had some synergies with a later relic? Yeah, that's this one. This wasn't the most popular one, but it was definitely the sleeper pick of the 3. If you pick Desert, you could end a solo Temporos game in just under 2 minutes with this relic. And if you're the idle player that took this is where you got your power spike. Now for rating the 3, I give Treasure Seeker the thumbs up, Bloodthirsty the sideways thumb, and Infernal Gathering the diagonal upwards thumb. Treasure Seeker was an absolute blast to use and I had no negative experiences with it. Bloodthirsty I've heard of Relic Regret from others saying a lot of its benefits were overkill, and they'd rather have picked something else. And Infernal Tools I know is strong, but the Dragon Tools as well as Smoldering Stone are already available, and as far as them operating faster, that really didn't matter if you were doing tick manipulation anyway. But not everything can be tick manipulated though, and there are tasks to do things such as Temporos, Wintertod, you get the picture. Now on to another diverse tier. Tier 6 brought in Equilibrium, Farmer's Fortune, and the Ruinous Powers. Equilibrium would give you extra experience equal to 10% of your total level anytime you got an experience drop, and that bonus is doubled if it's your lowest skill that you're training. The bonus experience itself is not multiplied by your experience multiplier, but it does have synergy with Production Prodigy, where you won't get scammed out of the bonus experience. Instead, you'll get it for each item processed. Now, I picked this one, and I can safely say, it sucks. It flat out sucks. It's so bad. If you pick this, you will agree with me. It is the worst relic that has come out this season. There's a reason that less than 5% of players picked it, and it's an absolute bait. My only cope is that it slightly sped up some skilling grinds, but in the grand scope of things, it really just made 16x experience turn into 20x experience. And 20% bonus experience does sound good, but trust me, it is so jank. Do not pick this ever again unless they buff it. Next up we have Farmer's Fortune. This gives you 20% chance to save the seed for anything you plant, allows you to harvest patches 25 times faster, gives you triple the harvest, and denotes all of your crops. And the best part, your patches grow instantly and never get disease. This was the absolute epitome of broken. It completely solved the farming and herblore skills no matter what your build. And if you had the seeds for it, you could just rocket up to 200 mil farming in one sitting. If you took this relic, you didn't regret it one bit. And lastly, we have the Ruinous Powers, which just gave you access to the Ruinous Powers. But these were more beneficial than you'd think. It's got the 3 best defensive prayers in the game, even better than Piety, Rigor, and Augury. And for those 3 prayers, you needed to unlock specific regions, not to mention the added utility of the Protect from Bread prayer in tandem with Karambwans. I give Equilibrium the thumbs down, and if I could fit a second thumb, I'd give it 2 thumbs down. Farmer's Fortune the thumbs up, and Ruinous Powers the diagonal thumbs up. Equilibrium shouldn't be a surprise, but if this thing gave twice as much experience as it does now, then we might be looking at that thumb going up higher, perhaps too high. It's a bit of a tricky one to balance, and I think Jagex knows that. Farmer's Fortune and Ruinous Powers were great choices no matter your playstyle, and I have not heard of anyone regretting their choices for these two. Tier 7 is another combat amplifier. We've got Soul Stealer, Weapon Master, and Berserker. Soul Stealer increased your minimum hit from 0 to 10% of your max hit. You got 50% chance to gain 10% lifesteal and prayer restoration on a successful hit, but this fell a bit short when it came to multi-target attacks and multi-hitting weapons because it wouldn't work with them, or just not work that well with them. On top of that, you could still hit zeros if you missed your target, so it was a bit deceptive in its description unfortunately. And the lifesteal effect is a bit overkill considering we're all very overpowered as is. Next up, we have Weapon Master. Special attacks will never miss, and your minimum hit is increased to 20% of your max hit. You have triple special attack restoration, and the new gimmick that was added is if you don't have enough special attack meter, you can sacrifice 25 hit points to do another special attack. This one was heavily region and combat style dependent, but produced some very goofy combinations like the infinite ZCB with Phoenix necklaces, and infinite Dragon Claws, you get the idea. Last up, we have arguably the best relic in the entire game, Berserker. This gave you the Darok set effect, but at all times. The lower your HP, the higher your max hit. On top of that, it guaranteed your max hit against targets that had full HP when you declared your attack, and this doesn't do an accuracy check. So with weapons such as the Shadow of Tumekin, Ancient Magics, ranged weapons, etc., it was very possible to gain this benefit 2 to 3 times per target. The game becomes very different when you can 1 to 2 hit almost every NPC in the game. Soul Stealer gets the diagonal downwards thumb, Weapon Master and Berserker both get the thumbs up. Soul Stealer was the obvious poor choice out of the three, considering most NPCs die in 1 to 2 hits anyway and have no time to attack you. You don't really get to make use of its benefits, plus with all the help with other relics as far as getting supplies, it's incredibly overkill with what it does. While it does make for a very AFK experience for idle players, in most if not all cases, you can get the same experience with Berserker and other ways of lifesteal already available. Weapon Master and Berserk don't need more explanations as to why they're good. If you picked either one of these, you know firsthand how strong they really were. And now on to the final tier. Tier 8 gave us Executioner, Undying Retribution, and Guardian. Executioner gave you an axe which would always hit 750 damage against targets under 20% health. This was treated as a ranged attack weapon that had the same attack speed as a blowpipe, and would respect any protection from ranged attacks or damage reduction like Akazen Rage Phase or even the Kraken. Now this one had very little use outside of bossing, but when you are bossing, it's pretty unmatched in terms of strength. A lot of NPCs have an enraged phase that begins at 20% or lower, like Wardens, Verzik, Zabak, the DT2 bosses, you get the picture. In group raids it was very beneficial, almost mandatory to have at least one person with this relic, but became overkill to have extras, unless your Axeman, dies in the room prematurely. One last thing to note, this item gives you a ridiculous amount of passive range experience, so if you didn't take the range relic, don't worry, you ended up getting over 50 mil range experience without ever having to think. Next we have Undying Retribution. Upon dying, your hit points and prayer are fully restored, and you'll deal up to 198 typeless damage in a 7x7 square around you depending on your prayer level. This damage unfortunately won't work against monsters that are immune to typeless damage such as P2 Verzik, Vorkath, and stuff like that. It's got a 3-minute cooldown, but it's wiped away anytime you actually die, or hard reset your character in a way that would reset an imbued heart. So think like clan wars, entering and leaving a raid, anything that does something of the sort. And lastly, dying in raids where you would lose points for doing so would not negatively impact you or your team for activating this relic. This one was a bit slept on and surprisingly really good, even by me. While its overall DPS is lower than Executioner or Guardian, it didn't matter that much in raids where you spend a good portion of time running between rooms. Not to mention if you took Berserker and you're sitting on low hit points, you can do so with less stress, since if you make that one mistake that causes you to lose that last hit point, you're not punished for it. And this relic didn't even have to be used for just defensive purposes. You could use mechanic damage to activate it and offensively do things such as clearing out large portions of mobs with the snap of your fingers. And last on the list is Guardian. This allowed you to summon a much stronger Thrall, which would hit between 6 and 15 damage per hit, and it was very accurate. It will use the style that your target is weakest to, and in multi-combat it would use AoE attacks for ranged and magic. And unlike Superior Sorcerer, you could actually turn this effect off if you wanted to. On top of all this, if you took Kourend, you could even summon a Thrall alongside of it. This choice was definitely the safest pick if you had no idea what to take, but it was the least flashy out of the three. For these three, I give Executioner and Undying the thumbs up, and Guardian the sideways thumb. The first two always brought heavy impact anytime they had use, while Guardian just seemed to be a small passive increase to your DPS and was way too one-dimensional of a benefit. But this tier was very diverse and there wasn't really a wrong pick, which is exactly what we're looking for when it comes to a Relic tier. And that's all I've got for you guys today. On screen now is all the Relics and all of my thumb ratings for them. If you thought this summary was spot on, or if there were things you disagree with, I'd love to hear about them in the comment section below. I love the League's game mode personally and hearing about others' thoughts on how this one played out. And if you enjoyed the video, consider giving it a like and perhaps a subscription. Both are free and are the best ways to support the channel if you enjoy my content. This has been a cold one, and I'll see you next time.